Hi everyone, welcome back to Forsaken Joe. That night, I was standing in the kitchen, staring at the 2 plates of pasta I'd made hours ago. The candles I lit had melted into sad puddles of wax, and the wine was warm. She still wasn't home. I didn't even bother checking my phone anymore. I already knew where she was. She'd chosen him again. Her boss, the guy who calls at all hours, the guy she claims is just a mentor. And there I was, standing in the wreckage of what was supposed to be our special dinner, holding on to the stupid hope that maybe she'd walk in, apologize, and say I was the one she wanted to be with. Instead, the apartment felt colder than ever. I found myself whispering out loud, "Why am I doing this to myself?" No answer, of course. Just me, the flicker of dying candlelight, and this sick knot in my stomach that told me everything had changed. I went to our bedroom and noticed her perfume on the dresser, the expensive one she only wears when she wants to impress. She hadn't worn it for me in months. My chest tightened as I looked at her empty side of the bed, the one that used to smell like us, like home. That was the moment I realized I couldn't keep pretending this was normal. Something was breaking, and it wasn't just my heart. It was my dignity. The next morning, Delilah acted as if nothing had happened. She breezed into the kitchen wearing that same navy dress from last night, humming softly while scrolling through her phone. "Morning," she said, like she hadn't left me sitting alone with my thoughts, like I hadn't spent half the night convincing myself she was still the same woman I married. I wanted to ask how the dinner went, but the words stuck in my throat. Maybe I was afraid of the answer. Maybe I didn't want to hear her talk about him with that casual excitement she used to save for me. She kissed my cheek and told me she'd be working late again. That word, again, felt like a knife. I nodded like a fool, but something in my chest burned. I couldn't shake the image of her walking into that dinner, smiling, laughing, maybe leaning in closer to hear him better. Did he notice her freckles the way I used to? Did he compliment her laugh, the one that still melts me even when I'm furious? I hated myself for even wondering, but the thoughts were like barbed wire, wrapping tighter and tighter around my mind. By the afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I found myself scrolling through her social media, looking for any clue, any hint of what she was really doing. Nothing. Just photos from months ago, smiling couple shots that felt like they belonged to strangers. I started noticing little things I'd never paid attention to before. How often she guarded her phone when I walked by. How she'd smile at texts and then quickly lock the screen. I told myself I wasn't that guy, the paranoid husband who imagines betrayal around every corner. But deep down, I knew I was already slipping into that role. When she got home that night, I studied her face like it held a map to the truth. She laughed at something on her phone and said she was tired. No mention of me, no mention of us. I wanted to scream, to tell her I wasn't invisible. Instead, I just stood there, watching her walk past me, her heels clicking on the hardwood like punctuation marks in a sentence I didn't understand. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. That's when the idea hit me. If I couldn't trust her words, maybe I'd find my answers elsewhere. I decided that the next time she mentioned a late work dinner, I wouldn't sit at home waiting. I would follow her. I would see for myself what was happening, whether it destroyed me or not. I waited 3 days for the next late work dinner. 3 days of pretending everything was normal, forcing smiles that felt like cracks in my face, nodding when she spoke, even though my mind was already miles ahead, planning every step. By the time Thursday came, I was wound up like a spring. I watched her get ready with a kind of sick fascination, like I was seeing her through new eyes. She put on that emerald green dress, the one she said was too bold for our dates, and spritzed the perfume that clung to her skin like a secret. I asked her, "What time will you be home?" And she replied, "Don't wait up, Artie. It might be late." She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, my heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I grabbed my coat and slipped out 5 minutes later, keeping a distance as I followed her car. I felt like some bad character from a thriller movie, clutching the steering wheel, trying not to get too close at the lights. My palms were sweaty. What if she saw me? What would I even say? "Hi, honey, just casually following you to make sure you're not having a romantic dinner with your boss." I'd sound insane. She drove to a part of town we rarely visit, upscale, with sleek glass buildings and neon lights glowing off wet pavement. I parked half a block away and watched her walk into a restaurant I'd never heard of. It wasn't just fancy. It was the kind of place where they don't even bother with menus because everything is custom and expensive. I saw her greet someone at the entrance, not her boss, not someone I recognized. He was younger, maybe early 30s, dressed in a tailored suit, leaning in just a little too close when they spoke. My throat went dry. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. There was something in the way she touched his arm while laughing, the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the room, even from across the street. I sat in my car for over an hour, watching through the window as they shared a bottle of wine, laughing, leaning close, shoulders brushing like they'd done it 1,000 times. I didn't even realize I was gripping the steering wheel so tightly until my hands ached. At some point, I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped out of the car, thinking I'd go in there and, what, 'cause a scene, confront her? But my legs felt like lead. Instead, I stood on the corner, half hidden by a streetlight, watching them leave the restaurant together. They didn't notice me, of course. Why would they? I was just the invisible husband, the background character in her life, watching as she got into his car with that same smile I used to believe was mine alone. I drove home in silence, my mind running 100 miles per hour. I wanted to smash something, scream, demand answers. But when she walked through the door later that night, hair slightly tousled and smelling faintly of his cologne, I said nothing. I just stared at her. And she stared back, as if daring me to ask. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just about suspicion anymore. Something real was happening, and I was losing her. I needed a plan, not just to catch her, but to understand why I wasn't enough anymore. The days that followed felt like living in slow motion, like every second was stretched just to test how long I could hold myself together before breaking. Delilah acted as if nothing had changed, as if we weren't drifting apart like two strangers who'd accidentally been living under the same roof. I watched her closely, every move, every glance at her phone, every half smile she thought I wouldn't notice. I stopped sleeping properly. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and just stare at her side of the bed, wondering if the warmth on her skin came from my presence or the ghost of someone else's touch. I hated myself for thinking that way, but the doubt had crawled into my head and started living there like an unwanted tenant. One night, while she showered, I found myself staring at her phone on the nightstand. It was just sitting there, screen lit up with some notification from a work group chat. I've never been that guy, the one who snoops. But my hands were shaking with the urge to know the truth. I almost picked it up, but something stopped me. I wanted her to hand me the truth herself. I wanted her lies to fall apart on their own, without me clawing through them like some desperate paranoid husband. That's when I came up with the idea. If she had nothing to hide, then a simple test wouldn't hurt. I told her I'd booked a guy's weekend out of town with an old college friend. I made up some story about fishing and drinking beer by a lake. She seemed oddly thrilled at the news, as if she couldn't wait to have the apartment to herself. "Have fun, Artie," she said, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek, the kind of kiss you give your brother or a distant cousin. That kiss told me more than any text message could. Of course, I didn't go anywhere. I parked my car 3 streets away and waited, my nerves twisting into knots. Hours passed. Around 8 p.m., I saw her step out of the building. She wasn't dressed like someone planning a quiet night with Netflix. She wore that dark red dress she had once called dangerous, the one she'd never worn for me. I followed her again, this time on foot, staying far enough back so she wouldn't notice. She didn't go to a restaurant this time. She went to a hotel, a sleek, towering hotel with glowing windows and a revolving door that seemed to swallow her whole. My chest felt like it was collapsing. I stood across the street, staring at the lobby as if it would give me answers, but all I saw was her reflection in the glass as she disappeared inside. A few minutes later, the man from the restaurant walked in after her. Same tailored suit, same casual confidence that made my blood boil. I didn't go in. I couldn't. I just stood there, hands in my pockets, nails digging into my palms so hard they left marks. My mind was screaming, "Do something! Confront her! Don't just stand here!" But I was frozen. What if I went inside and confirmed my worst fear? What if I saw something I couldn't unsee? I walked back to the car like a ghost, every step heavier than the last. Sitting behind the wheel, I stared at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked like a man who'd already lost, like someone who'd been erased from his own life. I couldn't bring myself to drive home. I just sat there, watching the hotel entrance until midnight, waiting for her to come out. When she finally did, she wasn't alone. He walked beside her, smiling, saying something that made her laugh. My laugh, the one I thought belonged to me. They hugged before parting ways, and I swear, for a moment, I stopped breathing. I drove home in silence again, but this time, something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just suspicious anymore. I was broken, and I needed answers. The next time she lied to me, I'd be ready. And this time, I wasn't going to just follow her. I was going to confront her. The next morning, she came into the kitchen like nothing had happened. She was humming, wearing one of my old t-shirts like she used to when we were happy, and smiling like the night before hadn't existed. I watched her pour coffee, my chest tightening with every second of her silence. She looked at me, her eyes bright, and asked if I slept well. I don't know why that question broke something in me, but I couldn't hold back anymore. I slammed my mug down on the table, startling her, and asked where she'd been last night. The room went quiet, heavy. She blinked at me, tilting her head slightly like I'd just asked a stupid question. I told you, we had a late strategy meeting. Her voice was too even, too rehearsed. I laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that means something is funny. It was bitter, raw. At a hotel? I asked. Her face shifted, just for a split second, but I caught it. That flicker of panic gone in an instant. "What are you talking about, Arthur?" she said, her voice calm, but with this edge underneath, like a wire pulled too tight. I told her everything. I followed her. I saw the man. I saw them go inside together. My words spilled out, harsh and clumsy, but I didn't care. I just needed her to admit something. Anything. She stood there, leaning against the counter, arms crossed, and didn't say a word for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she sighed. "You're losing your mind?" she whispered. "Do you hear yourself? Following me? Spying on me? This is insane! Insane!" That word hit me like a punch. I wanted to scream that I wasn't crazy, that I'd seen it with my own eyes, but the more I tried to explain, the colder she became. "Arthur," she said finally, "this marriage can't survive if you don't trust me. I can't do this with you anymore if you're going to treat me like some suspect." I stood there, stunned. She wasn't denying anything. Not really. She was twisting it, making me feel like I was the problem. It worked too. For a moment, I actually questioned myself. Was I imagining it? Was I just being paranoid, broken from my own insecurities? But then I remembered the way she laughed with him, the smell of his cologne on her skin, the way she hadn't looked at me in months. No, I wasn't crazy. "Do you love him?" I asked quietly, my voice barely more than a whisper. She froze, eyes narrowing just slightly. "There is no him, Arthur," she said, but the way she looked away told me everything I needed to know. The conversation ended there, with her storming off and slamming the bedroom door, leaving me standing in the kitchen, shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there, listening to her breathing beside me, wondering how we got here, how the woman I married became someone I didn't recognize. I realized something terrifying in that silence. I couldn't keep living like this, drowning in questions and half-truths. The next step wouldn't be just following her. It would be getting answers, real answers, even if I had to tear apart everything to find them. I didn't leave the house for most of that weekend. While she said she had errands to run and team calls, I sat alone in the living room, replaying every detail of the past few months, like I was combing through crime scene footage. Every late night, every vague text, every "don't wait up" felt like a piece of a puzzle I was just too stupid to solve. I felt like a man who was living in a house filled with ghosts, our old laughter still clinging to the walls, memories playing out in flashes while reality kept sinking its teeth into me. By Sunday night, I decided I couldn't rely on her to give me answers. I needed proof, something undeniable that would rip the truth out into the light. I dug out an old camera I used for vacations years ago and rigged it in the living room, hidden behind some books on a shelf. I set up another in the hallway. I hated myself for it. I felt like a criminal in my own home, but my mind wouldn't let me rest otherwise. It wasn't just about catching her. It was about reclaiming the sanity I felt, slipping through my fingers. The first night, nothing happened. She came home late, looking tired, barely speaking, and collapsed into bed. But the second night was different. I woke up around 1 a.m. and noticed she wasn't beside me. I checked the footage on my phone, and there she was, in the living room, pacing with her phone to her ear. Her voice was low, urgent, almost trembling, but I couldn't make out the words. I watched her sit on the couch, her hand covering her face like she was trying not to cry. That image burned into my head. It didn't look like guilt. It looked like fear. That shook me more than anything. Was I wrong? Was she hiding something entirely different? A part of me wanted to run out and ask her what was going on, but I stayed frozen in the bedroom, listening to the faint sound of her voice through the walls. She came back to bed around 2 a.m., slipping under the covers like nothing had happened. I pretended to be asleep, but my mind was on fire. The next day, while she was at work, I went through her things. I know it's a violation of trust, but at this point, trust was long dead. I checked her desk, her drawers, even the glove compartment in her car. That's when I found something that made my blood run cold. A room key card for the same hotel I saw her walk into. It was tucked inside a book she hadn't touched in years. I just sat there in the driver's seat of her car, holding the key card, my hands trembling. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was real. My heart was pounding like I'd just discovered a dead body. I didn't know if I wanted to scream or cry, but I knew one thing. I couldn't keep playing the role of the quiet, broken husband. That night, I put the key card on the kitchen table and waited for her to come home. When she saw it, her face drained of color. She didn't say a word, just stared at me, frozen. For a moment, I thought she'd confess, that this would be the moment we ripped the truth out of each other. But instead, she turned and walked straight to the bedroom, shutting the door behind her like I didn't exist. I sat there for hours, staring at that door, wondering what kind of life we were even living. The silence between us had grown so thick I could feel it pressing on my chest. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to leave. Not yet. Not until I knew exactly who she was when I wasn't looking. The key card on the table stayed there all night, untouched, like a loaded weapon between us. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I kept staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning with images of her and that man, laughing over wine, leaning close in a hotel room that wasn't ours. By morning, I felt like a stranger in my own skin. When she walked into the kitchen, she didn't even glance at the key card. She just grabbed her coffee and phone like it was any other day, like the silence choking us wasn't screaming louder than words ever could. I realized something then. This wasn't just about catching her anymore. I needed to confront him, whoever he was. I needed to look into his face and see what kind of man thought he could just stroll into my life and take what wasn't his. It wasn't about winning her back, not really. It was about getting some piece of myself back, the part of me that had been humiliated and crushed under the weight of not knowing. I spent the entire day tracking him down. I started by calling the hotel, pretending I was trying to confirm a reservation under her boss's name. And after a few tries, I got a lead. It wasn't even her boss. It was someone named Julian. I didn't recognize the name, but I sure as hell wasn't going to forget it. I found him online easily, a real estate investor with a perfect smile, the kind of guy who probably never doubted himself for a second in his life. I stared at his pictures like they held some kind of answer, but all I saw was a smug face that made me want to break something. That night, when Delilah said she had another team dinner, I didn't even bother pretending anymore. I waited for her to leave, grabbed my coat, and followed her again. My heart pounded like I was about to do something irreversible. I felt this mix of fear and anger that made my hands shake. But I didn't care. I just needed to see them together one last time, to know I wasn't crazy. She went to the same hotel. This time, I didn't just wait in the car. I walked in. I don't know what possessed me, but I marched straight through the lobby, looking for her. The receptionist smiled politely, asking if I had a room key. My throat tightened, but I kept walking, ignoring the calls behind me. I didn't even know what I'd do if I found them, but the thought of her in some elevator, laughing with him, made my chest burn. I took the stairs 2 at a time, checking every hallway, every corner, and then I saw them. Not in a room, no, they were standing near the bar, talking like they'd known each other forever. Julian had his hand on her arm, and she wasn't pulling away. I froze, my blood roaring in my ears. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to storm up to them, to rip his hand off her, to demand she look me in the eye and tell me the truth. But I didn't. I just stood there, watching, like some coward. She laughed at something he said, and it was the same laugh that used to be just mine. That's when something inside me snapped. I turned around and left, my chest heaving. I don't even remember walking back to the car. I just remember gripping the steering wheel so hard I thought it might break, my vision blurry with rage and heartbreak. When she came home later, I was still awake, sitting in the dark. She saw me and hesitated, her hand on the doorknob, like she'd stepped into a trap. And maybe she had. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low, shaking but firm. This time, she didn't roll her eyes or tell me I was crazy. She just stood there, silent, waiting for me to speak. I realized then that I was done waiting for her lies. I was going to find out the truth, even if it destroyed us both. The moment I said, "We need to talk," everything changed. Delilah didn't shut me down this time. Instead, she closed the door behind her and sat down at the kitchen table, finally willing to face what had been tearing us apart for months. I laid everything out: the late nights, the lies, the hotel keycard, the man I followed. For the first time, she didn't deny it. She told me the truth. Julian wasn't just some random guy. He was someone she met during a difficult time, a time when I was too caught up in my own problems to notice her slipping away. She confessed that their relationship started as an escape, a way to feel seen again, but it quickly became something more complicated. She said she loved me, but she also admitted she was confused, scared, and lost. Hearing her admit all that broke me, but it also cracked open a window of hope. We decided to try, really try, to rebuild what was broken. Therapy, honest conversations, small steps that felt enormous. It wasn't easy. There were days I wanted to give up, and days she questioned whether we could survive the damage. But slowly, piece by piece, we started finding each other again. Months later, sitting across from her at that same small Italian restaurant where I once planned a special dinner, I saw her eyes light up. Not because of a secret, but because we were finally in the same room, really together. That night wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And for the first time in a long time, I believed we could make it. Thanks for listening to this confession on Forsaken Joe. What part of this story hit you the hardest? Have you ever experienced a moment where trust was broken, but there was still a chance to rebuild? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories. Don't forget to subscribe for more real confessions that make you think and feel. See you in the next one.